Hi, good evening everyone. Hi, hope I'm audible to everybody. Yeah, perfect. Um, I'm sure you guys have all heard from experts so far. I have about a half an hour slot, so I'll not bore you too much with what the market is doing. I'm guessing you're all very much on top of it. So maybe I'll just spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes talking about what we are thinking about the markets as of now. Um, I'm sure, as you're all aware, since September peak, we have seen severe correction in the markets, and the index level correction is probably not reflecting the pain and the broader, portfolios that we've seen so far. Now, just as a, I'll quickly run through what we think has happened. Of course, growth has slowed down quite severely from a very healthy pace of growth that we'd seen post-COVID especially. I think starting somewhere in September quarter, that was actually the main big negative surprise we saw, both in terms of economic growth, and that quickly reflected in corporate earnings as well. And when you look at the earnings expectations, and this is just for the Nifty constituents, back in August, we were expecting a very healthy mid-teens kind of earnings growth for FY25 and 26. That was following a very strong earnings delivery that we'd seen in the previous few years. If you recall, after a very long period, the corporate earnings rarely disappointed. I think over FY 21, 22, 23, after the COVID shock, we kept seeing earnings upgrades. And I guess to some extent we all expected some extrapolation of that. We were all aware that, okay, this is an election year and therefore you might see some slowdown in activity, in economic activity, in government spending, etc. But I think the extent of slowdown was quite meaningful. So in the budget of last year, the interim budget before the elections, the government had already indicated that after the threefold increase in spending, we are not going to spend as much. The responsibility or the incentive now ought to shift towards private sector. And they had indicated somewhere like a 10% kind of a growth for FY25 in terms of their own government spending. But what happened through the year was actually much worse than what we had all anticipated. And here you see the month by month, the cumulative government spend traction. I think September, October were probably the worst of it. Through December, we have seen some improvement. Jan numbers, I don't think, are still out. So on the fiscal side, we saw some amount of slowdown and tightening, which impacted, the overall economic activity. Even on the private side, until FY24, there were high hopes that there was a build-up to, an improvement in private capex growth. If you look at the sanctions and the intent that we saw from the private sector, they were all poised to grow faster than they were in earlier years. And indeed, if you track the, aggregate, the listed universe capex numbers, even in the first half of FY25, there was decent growth, if you see the chart here in terms of their own capex spends. That was not at all enough to compensate for the tightening from the government side. So I just talked about the central capex spend, but even on the state level, there was a significant decline in these spends that if you take, let's say, the top 15, 20 states, their aggregate spending was also down meaningfully, very much like the center. And of course, we had a very heavy election calendar. So naturally, that was, to some extent, was expected. But we also saw a subtle shift from a capex-oriented economy to a consumption-oriented sort of a mindset. I wouldn't say there is a major structural shift, but certainly from a point where you saw a big increase in capex spends as reflected, let's say, in the capex to GDP numbers, and perhaps to some extent over the last few years, the spend on consumer level activities was much more modest. To some extent, I think the government's tried to correct that a little. And worryingly, to some extent, I think this freebies that every state announced, I think did further impact the capital spending ability of the governments. So this is on the government side of capex, and we talked about the private capex, both which weakened in the first, the second half of calendar year 24. Simultaneously, real estate, which was doing extremely well, they came out of a decadal weakness in sales momentum. We saw that that engine that was firing for a few years post-COVID, that also came to a standstill by December. And I think to a large extent, this was not as much because of weakness in demand, but there was also majorly a shock in terms of supply side. So most of the developers were left with very little inventory, and quite a few of them faced delays in their launches. Even as we speak, some of the developers, especially the ones based out of Bangalore, I think they still face a little bit of delay in their approvals. And therefore, given the low inventory in the overall system, lack of launches, so the household capex also weakened. So all three, whether it was government, private, or household level capex, all three slowed down. And to cap it all, even on the monetary side, things were not very easy. So we had a reasonably tight monetary situation. Liquidity, as you may have all heard repeatedly over the last few months, liquidity has been a big constraint. Interest rates, only now I think we've seen the first cut. And even as we speak, the expectations are not very high in terms of how much the RBI is going to cut. The views are very divergent. So I think the consensus view right now is that it may end up being a shallow rate cut cycle, depending on how growth and inflation trend from here onwards. So we didn't have much help either on fiscal side or monetary side. So the extent of economic slowdown, I think, was far greater than what we would have anticipated in a normal election year. Now coming to consumption side. So what has happened is, post-COVID, there were some interesting trends in terms of consumption. Rural growth was extremely weak as we headed out of COVID. I think that sector was particularly affected, in addition to the lower end of urban consumption as well. So mass consumption categories were weak coming out of the pandemic, whereas we saw very strong growth in the upper end of the consumption categories. This is that so-called K-shaped recovery that is often quoted everywhere. As we speak, I think some of that trend is normalizing. A lot of the rural indicators are turning positive, and that is a little encouraging. Whereas on the urban side, what has happened is, and I guess this is also reflected in some of the, the banking system asset quality issues as well. The leverage at the household level increased quite sharply. So I think that is now sort of, let's say, manifesting in very weak urban consumption as well. And the response by the government in the budget, where they, had some benefiting tax changes, that's supposedly about a 1 trillion rupee kind of a boost that ought to go to the middle class. That may help mitigate the pressure to some extent. Of course, I mean, the hopes are very high riding on this 1 trillion rupee of extra, boost that has been given. It may go into easing the balance sheet issues of the middle class consumer, who has seen their EMI burden increased double over the last few years, whereas their income levels have actually not grown that much. To top it, they also felt acutely the high inflationary pressures as well. So this particular pocket of consumers which were badly impacted, I think that may start to see some gradual improvement. Perhaps it may lead to an overall improvement in demand and sentiment that may then kickstart private sector capex. I know we are all, I think, tired of waiting for the boom in private sector capex. Perhaps this may trigger it, hopefully, and maybe a few more, interest rate cuts might ease the situation overall. But that's still, we are still in a wait and watch situation. As I mentioned on the, the monetary side, liquidity has been very tight. The RBI, rightly or wrongly, has intervened in the forex markets. I think INR, despite the, increase in dollar, I think the USD INR has not depreciated as much as it might have otherwise. One uncertainty from a global perspective is from the US. What happens in terms of tariffs. I think the noise around what can be the potential impact is pretty elevated right now, and everybody is sort of uncertain about the exact impact, where it will settle at, whether the US, the current administration is using it as a negotiating tool, or are they very serious about actually going ahead and implementing some of the tariffs. That still, I think, remains to be seen. What has impacted the markets even further? Two factors that's not in the slides. One is, while India started to slow down, we have seen an improvement in outlook for quite a few of the global markets: US, China, Europe. So now, at least from an FII perspective, there are some options that are. Let's leave US aside, but you have China and Europe that are relatively less expensive, where it is coming off a bottom. So they have, different options now. The second factor that has also dragged down Indian markets is the supply. So we have seen, I think, the past 12 months, the supply of paper, that is from promoter selling, IPOs, etc., that has exceeded institutional demand. So that's also impacted markets. So where do we see markets going from here? Our belief is Nifty earnings growth for FY25, I think it's settled. We are likely, I think, that 8 to 9% growth for FY25. I think that's baked in, and that's probably what we are going to end up with. I don't see any further downgrades there. If you look at the most recent earnings season, it's been better than what we saw in September. Still not a big bounce back, but it's an improving trend. And, the overall economic activity as well. What took maybe 3 to 6 months to slow down, our guess is maybe it will take another 3 to 6 months to get back to healthy growth levels. So that's the sort of time frame that we are looking at for the markets also to stabilize. Current high frequency indicators from an economic perspective are still mixed. So we are not getting a very clear indicator that the economy is back on the kind of growth path that India ought to be doing. So that's still, we are in wait and watch. So our expectation is, given where valuations are, and I think I skipped that chart earlier, while the large cap valuations, I think, are reasonable now, the small and mid cap is still, a little elevated. I don't know if the charts are very clear, but when you look at the small and mid cap, perhaps when you look at the last 5-year average, we are still maybe about 10-15% higher than that. So unless earnings do a quick comeback, or the economy does a quick comeback, I feel we believe that the markets may remain in this range-bound manner for the next 3 to 6 months. That's the basis on which we are, looking at our portfolios. Now, I have spoken a little longer on the markets than I intended to. But let me get straight um, to the products. And I feel that while hybrid strategies get more attention during volatile markets, my belief is that it should be an important part of any investor's portfolio. It gives a bit of that diversification, and of course that depends on the risk profile of your individual clients. But it's a good let's say less risky, uncorrelated kind of returns that you can incorporate into your client's portfolio over a longer period of time. Having said that, let me get straight into the products. I'll speak about three main products from the Franklin Templeton basket. And these are situated on the different points of the risk return curve. Starting with the equity savings fund, which is at the most conservative part of the risk return. You have an equity exposure at about 15% on a net basis, 15 to 18%. It's an equity taxation oriented fund. So the rest of the 50% is made up of arbitrage. And then you have the balance 35% that is fixed income. So this is the most conservative. And it's also an interesting offering in the sense that this is, let's say, this gives an alpha over your FD kind of returns with the benefit of equity taxation. So that's an important sell that you may have with your clients. Next comes the balanced advantage fund. So where it is a dynamic asset allocation process. If you look at the different funds in the industry on average, or if we just look at the model that we follow in our balanced advantage, on average, the equity proportion is at about 50 to 60%. So it is less than an aggressive equity fund. And probably greater than a conservative debt hybrid fund. So it sits there in between. And then you have the aggressive equity, where the equity allocation is about 68 to 70%. So that's, those are the three funds that, stack up in terms of risk return. This, I don't think I need to make a case for, hybrid funds in general. You do have many years where fixed income gives you that kind of a cushion when, especially when markets are volatile or in a correction kind of a mode. And the uncorrelated returns kind of helps investors manage risk. This is just an illustration of, hypothetically, I mean, if you look at the last, this is about 22 years, and if you look at the returns for a pure equity, pure fixed income, and in between sits the hybrid fund, the kind of risk and returns that one can expect out of the product in general. Let me, here let me just briefly touch upon the investment philosophy that we follow for the hybrid funds, both on the equity and the fixed income side. I'll cover the fixed income first because that's fairly simple. We stick to high quality credit, mainly AAA, AA rated papers. The duration doesn't usually go beyond 5 years, so we are somewhere in between 2 to 5 years. And at this point also, if you look at the duration of the fixed income bucket in the hybrid funds, it would be somewhere in between. We do take duration calls, but we try and stick to this range. On the equity side, it's apart from the equity savings fund, so all the other hybrid funds, the equity philosophy is a flexi cap strategy. So our investment philosophy is we don't take bold calls in terms of market cap, sector or style versus the benchmark. Our approach is to mainly focus on stock selection. The sector and the market cap allocation, etc., tends to be an outcome of the stock selection process. So at this point, the market cap allocation would be very similar to the broader benchmark, which is about 70-30 between large and small and mid cap. And we try and focus on, so our favorite hunting ground, as you know, is the case with many investors, would be compounding growth ideas. Of course, these are not available at very attractive valuations. You know, at most points they're never available at attractive valuations, but still those are the areas where we prefer to pick stocks. But we also do look at businesses that are currently out of favor. So we do take a small position in contrarian ideas. We do look at companies that are currently in a very high growth phase. And also, given that we don't take very huge sectoral calls, we also do have the traditional value names also in our portfolio. So it's a you know, good balance between different styles and different sectors. Having said that, in terms of what sectors or industries we like, we do think there should be some recovery in the capex cycle. Although it's still a wait and watch mode, and we are not, you know, going aggressively in terms of investing there. We also believe that there will be a recovery in, you know, some of the consumer discretionary spends. So we do, you know, favor names in that space as well. Now coming to the funds. So the equity hybrid fund, as I mentioned, that's about a 68-70% equity allocation, you know, product. And you'll, in this slide, you'll also see the fixed income breakup in terms of corporate bonds, government bonds, etc. And see the appeal of, you know, some of these hybrid funds. I'll just talk about balanced advantage fund and then come to some of the, you know, factors that I think are interesting about this. So our balanced advantage fund is young. We launched it in September of 2022. However, the model and the engine that drives the asset allocation for balanced advantage fund has been around. As some of you may know, we had the Franklin Dynamic PE Fund of Fund that we had launched in 2003. That was probably the industry first in terms of an asset allocation fund. We are following pretty much the same model for the balanced advantage fund, with the addition that we do have an actively managed equity bucket. It is an equity taxation kind of a fund, unlike the fund of fund that we currently have. And the premise is simple. So most balanced advantage funds, I guess, would be positioned to play on mean reversion of valuation. So we increase our equity allocation when markets or valuations are correcting and vice versa. So that's very simple. But the methodology that we use, and I guess we have been very transparent about the way we arrive at the equity allocation. We look at the trailing numbers for NSE 500 on a PE and PB basis. And we just take a simple average of these two. Now, if I look at the asset allocation trends for the balanced advantage fund since inception, you'll see interestingly the trailing NSE 500 PE now is looking very close to what we were back then in September 2022, although the price to book is still a little higher. So as we speak, I think through the correction, we probably bottomed in the low 40s in that July to September period. And since then, we have been gradually increasing our equity allocation. It is still below 50%, so we are not being very optimistic on the market yet. Valuations are still not attractive enough for the equity allocation to go beyond that. So we are currently hovering at about 48 to 49% based on what we are seeing in terms of equity valuations. And here you'll see the monthly performance of the fund versus the broader index, and the average up and down capture that the fund has managed versus, again, the NSE 500. So this is a nice range to work with. I think for any fund, when you're looking at the, especially a dynamically managed fund, I think this 60% upside capture, 30% downside capture, that's a good range to be in. And that's probably where we are right now. But if you look at, the different, both the aggressive hybrid fund, that's the FIEHF, and the dynamically managed fund. So I've just taken out some of the major market events in the past. And you'll find that the up capture and the down capture numbers are not bad. And it comes with much better risk for investors, especially who are wary of volatility. So if you look at, prior to 2022, I have used the fund of fund numbers because BAF only launched in September 22. But the allocation model is very similar. You'll find that, let's say for the aggressive hybrid fund, the down capture is slightly higher as expected because the equity allocation is also higher. But the upside capture also tends to be much higher. So in volatile times, these funds tend to stand out very well. And this is just a working in terms of an investor who's probably looking for a steady monthly income. Here also, hybrid funds provide that kind of offering in terms of having, let's say if you have an SWP, you don't need to necessarily have a dividend yielding fund for this. And in any case, given where the taxation rules are right now, perhaps an SWP makes more sense than a dividend yielding kind of a fund. So this is an example of, the SWP, if you had done this for the equity hybrid fund for the last 3, 5, and 10 years. So it's something that you might want to take back with you. Now, lastly, we are hopefully good on time. Lastly, on equity savings fund, I think this is, it's a personal favorite after the balanced advantage and the equity hybrid fund because it gives you that extra return for someone who is highly risk averse. For example, if you are, purely in a fixed income product, your annual returns on average might be, 6 to 8%, depending on the phase of the interest rate cycle where we are. On average, if you look at the last 5 to 10 year equity returns, you may be about 10 to 12% in that range at this point, given especially post the correction now. So that 15 to 18% that we allocate to equity, and hopefully if we can generate a bit of alpha on the benchmark index, you can end up with maybe a 1 to 1.5 percentage point extra return on an FD with some added risk, of course, but palatable and with the benefit of equity taxation. So it's a good product for someone who is extremely conservative but does want a bit of exposure to equity just to bump up their idle money, so-called, that they may have. So I think that's where this product comes in. We had repositioned this fund. Generally, the equity savings category, most funds would have a one-third kind of an allocation between net equity, arbitrage, and fixed income. We repositioned this fund in late 2023. In this, we also reconsidered the equity bucket. So unlike the hybrid funds where we use a flexi cap strategy, for the equity savings fund, the equity bucket is largely in large cap names. So 80-90% would be allocated to large cap, given the profile of the kind of client that we are, investor that we are targeting. So that was also a repositioning that we did when we changed the overall asset allocation mix. So with that, let me stop and take questions, if any. Um, See, the thing is, it is a large category, and most funds will have some form of asset allocation strategy. I suppose the one thing that does differentiate or stands out for BAF is, one is its long history. Not that BAF itself has that history, but we do have this in the market for over 20 years. So you can look at the returns of the fund of fund as an indicator of what happens during major market events, as I had mentioned in the slide. The second thing is it's an extremely simple model. It's there in the SID as well. I mean, if you guys have ever opened the SID for the Balanced Advantage Fund, you will find it there. The gradient, it's simple to understand. When markets have corrected, when valuations have corrected, the equity allocation for the fund will broadly match what you expect. So that, we do tend to follow the process a little more rigorously. The deviation from what the model suggests to what we actually allocate tends to be very low. So we have probably not deviated more than 500 to 600 basis points from what the model suggests. So to some extent, you'll find that we are sticking to a certain process when we allocate to BAF. In addition, I think there'll be some advantage of the alpha that you add in the equity selection. So I think these are the 3 points that I would mention. Slide on I think we can get that. I don't have it in the slides right now, but we might be able to come back to it. Yeah, I missed putting it in the slides as of now. But this is maybe the drawdown during the recent slowdown. That's one thing that I can mention, but I don't have offhand, I don't remember the information ratio. See, debt I am not aware, but currently I think the FII and the domestic institution holding is roughly same. In terms of just the quantum percentage, yeah, it's maybe around that level. Yeah, it's come back to I think 2012 or 13 levels after going up, so it's back to the decadal low. I think the expectation is beyond this, there may not be very severe outflows. They may still be because you have other markets performing well. But I suppose the good part is now at least the Indian markets are a little more resilient in terms of flows, thanks to the domestic institutional flows. But again, there you also have the retail bit. That behavior we need to watch, because as the last 1 year returns start to look very anemic, then you may see a second order impact of retail flows also. So FIIs, that has impacted the market, but going ahead, I think that's one aspect that we need to keep a watch on. So that 15% is a net long. The rest, 50% that makes up the total of 65 is arbitrage. So, yeah. Yes. No, we don't have gold and equity savings. We have another product, that's the multi-asset fund, which is again a fund of fund like the Franklin dynamic asset allocation. So that one has the blue chip as the underlying, fixed income and gold ETFs. I think currently it's about, in the multi-asset, I think it would be about 25%, 25. After the one we saw in February. Um, See, I think that's a very, it's now a very divided opinion. I personally feel unless growth decelerates even sharply from here, if things are stable, let's say, I feel that, you may not see very high rate cuts going forward. So at best, you may see another 25 to 50 basis points at best. So which will still qualify as a shallow rate cut cycle. That's the current expectation. Because inflation is being a little sticky, although we saw a bit of easing in January, that was seasonal. But the underlying, inflation has not trended down very meaningfully. So it may force the RBI to keep rate cut shallow. On overseas funds, we are talking about the US. Yeah, okay. See, overseas funds, so right now, the US market in terms of growth opportunities still looks attractive. And despite the rally in the last 2 years, the market may continue to do well unless there are some macroeconomic shocks and all the tariff uncertainty blows up in their own face. So that may, impact their economy. So until that point, US market still looks fine to me. And it may rally for another year, is the sense we have. Europe is a tough one to call. That market is rallying on the back of, easing war tensions, and it's coming off lows. Underlying demand hasn't improved. If you look at, let's say, just the automobile demand or any other end consumption, that still remains weak. And actually, that's the same thing for China as well. The underlying economic indicators haven't really improved, but the expectations have kicked in. China, maybe there's a little more confidence. I mean, maybe personally I have a little more confidence in China recovering, but Europe, I can't say. Yeah.